You love her and she loves you. You are on your own.
You have no idea. Twice the number of tribute, shoulders back, big smile. Best having a moment.
More competitors than usual.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
The Hunger Games. Sunrise on the Reaping takes us back into the world of Panem, but this time the story moves into a period that fans have been waiting to explore for years. Instead of following Katniss Everdeen, the story takes place decades earlier and focuses on a much younger Haymitch Abernathy. Long before he became the broken and sarcastic mentor audiences remember from the original Hunger Games trilogy. That alone makes this story different from what came before, because we already know the man Haymitch will eventually become. The interesting part is discovering what happened to him that changed his personality forever. The story is set during the 50th Hunger Games, also known as the Second Quarter Quell, for most people living in Panem. The Quarter Quell is already terrifying because the capital uses these special editions of the games to remind the districts that the rebellion has a price. But the 50th games are especially cruel. Instead of selecting the usual number of tributes, the capital announces that twice as many young people will be taken from the districts and forced into the arena. This means Haymitch is not simply entering another Hunger Games. He is entering one of the most brutal games in the history of Panem. Haymitch is still a teenager when his name is selected, and at this point in his life, he is very different from the character audiences know. He has not yet become the bitter mentor who spends his days drinking and pretending that nothing matters. He is young, intelligent, observant, and capable of understanding people around him. He comes from District 12, a place that has always been treated as one of the poorest and most powerless districts in Panem. For someone from District 12, surviving the games is already almost impossible, but Haymitch has something that can make him dangerous inside the arena. He knows how to think. The selection of the tributes changes everything almost immediately. Haymitch is pulled away from the life he knows and placed into a world where survival depends on making impossible decisions. He is surrounded by other young people who are equally frightened, although they may show that fear in completely different ways. Some will try to form alliances. Others will immediately think about eliminating their competition, and some may simply be trying to survive long enough to see another day. What makes the story particularly tragic is that Haymitch's future is already known. Anyone familiar with the original Hunger Games story understands that he eventually becomes the only living victor from District 12 before Katniss and Peeta enter the games years later. So the question is not simply whether Haymitch will survive. We already know that he does. The real question is what he has to lose in order to survive. The capital is also an important part of the story because the games are never just about the tributes. They are entertainment for the wealthy citizens of the capital and a weapon used to control the districts. The people watching from luxury apartments can treat the games like a spectacular television event, while children inside the arena are fighting for their lives. That contrast is one of the strongest ideas in the Hunger Games universe. And Sunrise on the Reaping gives the audience another opportunity to see how cruel that system really is. The 50th Hunger Games also give the capital a chance to create an even bigger spectacle. The Quarter Quell is designed to be remembered. More tributes mean more fear, more violence, and more entertainment for the people watching. For the capital, Haymitch is simply another young contestant. They do not care about his dreams, his family, or the life he had before the Reaping. Once his name is selected, his identity becomes part of their entertainment. But Haymitch is not completely alone. His relationship with people from District 12 becomes increasingly important as the story develops. He has connections to people he genuinely cares about, and those relationships give him something to fight for beyond simple survival. This is where the emotional side of the story becomes much more important. Haymitch is not entering the arena because he wants fame or glory. He is trying to survive and return to the people he loves. That makes every decision inside the arena more complicated. In the Hunger Games, trusting someone can save your life, but it can also get you killed. An alliance may seem like the smartest option at first, but eventually only one victor can leave the arena. Haymitch has to constantly decide who deserves his trust and when that trust might become a weakness. The arena itself is another major part of the story. The Hunger Games have always used the environment as another weapon against the tributes, and the Second Quarter Quell is remembered as one of the most unusual arenas in the series. The environment creates its own dangers, forcing the tributes to understand their surroundings instead of simply fighting one another. Survival becomes a combination of physical strength, intelligence, and awareness. This is where Haymitch's personality becomes especially interesting. He is not necessarily the strongest person in the arena, and he does not have the advantages that some tributes may possess, but he can observe patterns and recognize opportunities. Instead of blindly attacking every threat, he can think several steps ahead. That ability becomes one of the reasons he remains alive while other tributes begin disappearing. At the same time, the games begin to expose the psychological damage created by the capital. Every death is broadcast as entertainment. Every moment of fear becomes part of the show. The tributes are expected to perform for an audience that has no understanding of what they are actually experiencing. The more Haymitch sees, the more he begins to understand that the arena is not simply a place where teenagers kill each other. It is a carefully designed system created to destroy them emotionally as well as physically. This is also where the story connects with the larger themes of the Hunger Games franchise. The capital wants the districts to believe that they are powerless. It wants people to watch the games and accept them as inevitable. But Haymitch's intelligence creates a problem. A person who understands the rules can sometimes find ways to use those rules against the people who created them. That does not mean Haymitch suddenly becomes a revolutionary hero. At this stage, he is simply trying to stay alive. His decisions come from fear, instinct, and the desire to protect what remains of his life. But the choices he makes during these games will eventually define him. The cast surrounding Haymitch is equally important because the story introduces a younger generation of characters who exist long before Katniss's story begins. Among the most significant is Effie Trinket's eventual connection to District 12, although the characters and relationships in this period are very different from what audiences saw in the original films. The story also introduces new tributes and figures from the districts and capital, giving the audience a wider look at Panem before the events that eventually lead to Katniss Everdeen. The central performance, however, depends heavily on whoever takes on the role of young Haymitch. The character needs to feel familiar without simply copying Woody Harrelson's version from the earlier films. Young Haymitch should have the same intelligence and underlying personality, but he also needs to feel like someone who still has hope. The audience needs to believe that this teenager could eventually grow into the damaged man we meet years later. That transformation is probably one of the most important reasons this story works. We are not simply watching another Hunger Games. We are watching the creation of a character whose future has already been revealed. Every friendship, every loss, and every difficult decision carries extra weight because we know the consequences will stay with Haymitch for the rest of his life. The release of Sunrise on the Reaping is especially significant because the Hunger Games franchise has been away from theaters for several years following the conclusion of The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. That previous film introduced audiences to a much earlier version of Panem and showed the origins of President Snow. Sunrise on the Reaping moves forward from that period while still remaining far earlier than Katniss's story. The project is based on Suzanne Collins' novel of the same name, which expands the history of Panem and finally gives fans a much deeper look at Haymitch's past. For longtime fans, this is more than another prequel. Haymitch has always been one of the most mysterious characters in the franchise. We knew he had won the Hunger Games, but we never truly saw what happened during that victory or what it cost him. That is exactly what makes the upcoming movie so interesting. The audience already knows the ending, but knowing the ending does not necessarily make the journey less exciting. In fact, it can make it more painful. We know Haymitch will walk out of the arena alive, but we also know that the person who enters the arena will not be the same person who eventually becomes Katniss's mentor. The trailer and promotional material for a movie like this will naturally become a major part of the excitement because fans will be looking for clues about the arena, the tributes, Haymitch's relationships, and the overall tone of the film. The biggest question will be whether the movie can capture the darker atmosphere of the original Hunger Games while still creating something that feels new. And that may be the biggest challenge for Sunrise on the Reaping. The audience already knows Panem. We already know the rules. We already know how dangerous the games are. What the movie needs to provide is a story that makes us care about the characters, even though we already know where some of them are heading. Haymitch's story has the advantage of being emotionally connected to everything that comes later. When we eventually watch the original Hunger Games again, his actions as Katniss and Peeta's mentor will carry a completely different meaning. His drinking, his anger, his distrust, and his constant attempts to protect the tributes are no longer just personality traits. They become reminders of everything he experienced when he was their age, and that is where Sunrise on the Reaping has the potential to become one of the most emotional stories in the entire franchise. It is not simply about discovering how Haymitch won. It is about discovering how the Capitol managed to take a young man with a future and turn him into someone who spent years believing that survival itself was a punishment. The arena may be where Haymitch fights for his life, but the real battle is much bigger. He is fighting against a system designed to make people lose their humanity. And as the 50th Hunger Games move closer to their final moments, Haymitch will have to make decisions that will determine not only whether he survives, but what kind of person he becomes after the games are over. As Haymitch enters the arena, the reality of the 50th Hunger Games begins to sink in. Whatever confidence he may have had before the games is now being tested by a place designed to turn fear into survival instinct. Every sound has a meaning. Every movement in the distance could be another tribute. Even the people who appear friendly may already be thinking about how they can use him to stay alive. The first moments are chaotic, and that chaos becomes one of the biggest advantages for anyone who can keep their head clear. The tributes know that the supplies placed in the arena could mean the difference between life and death, but moving toward them also means exposing themselves to everyone else. Haymitch understands that rushing toward danger simply because something looks valuable could be a fatal mistake. Instead, he begins watching. He studies the other tributes, their movements, their reactions, and the way they respond when the situation becomes unpredictable. This is one of the first signs that Haymitch is not going to survive by brute force alone. His greatest weapon is his ability to think while everyone around him is panicking. He knows that the games are designed to reward aggression, but he also realizes that the Capitol expects certain things from the tributes. They expect violence. They expect dramatic confrontations. They expect the strongest contestants to dominate the weaker ones. Haymitch begins looking for the gaps in those expectations. Outside the arena, the games are becoming a massive spectacle. The Capitol audience watches the tributes as if they are characters in a story created specifically for their entertainment. The suffering happening inside the arena is transformed into television. The more dramatic the situation becomes, the more attention the games receive. This creates another layer of danger because surviving is not always enough. Tributes also have to become interesting to the people watching them. Sponsors can provide food, medicine, and other supplies, but those gifts come with an invisible price. A tribute who receives attention can gain an advantage, while someone who disappears from the audience's interest may be left with nothing. Haymitch therefore has to understand not only the arena, but also the people watching from far away. That becomes increasingly complicated because Haymitch does not naturally fit the image of a perfect Capitol favorite. He comes from District 12, and he does not have the polished appearance or training associated with tributes from wealthier districts. But there is something about his personality that can capture attention. He is intelligent, unpredictable, and difficult to control. The longer he remains alive, the more dangerous he becomes to the Capitol's carefully planned show. Meanwhile, the other tributes begin revealing who they really are. Some have been preparing for the games in ways Haymitch never could. Others are frightened teenagers who have no idea how they are supposed to survive. Some form alliances because they believe there is safety in numbers, while others understand from the beginning that every alliance has an expiration date. Haymitch has to decide where he stands. Trust is one of the most dangerous things in the arena because there is no guarantee that another tribute will keep their promise. Yet refusing every alliance can be just as dangerous. There are moments when cooperation is the only reason someone survives the night. Haymitch begins learning when to stay close to others and when to disappear before their problems become his own. At the same time, the emotional connection between the arena and District 12 becomes more important. Haymitch's thoughts repeatedly return to the life he left behind. The people he cares about are no longer physically beside him, but they remain the reason he continues moving forward. Every time he considers giving up, something reminds him that there is still a world outside the arena. That emotional connection makes the games more painful because Haymitch is not simply trying to survive for himself. He is trying to hold on to the idea that his life still belongs to him. The Capitol, however, sees things differently. To the Capitol, Haymitch is property for the duration of the games. His fear belongs to them. His victories belong to them. Even his eventual survival can be presented as another piece of entertainment. The Capitol does not want the districts to see the tributes as ordinary human beings. It wants them to see them as contestants in a competition. But Haymitch slowly begins to understand the difference between surviving the games and winning them. Winning means becoming a victor. Surviving means remaining yourself. Those two things may not be possible at the same time. As the number of tributes begins to fall, the atmosphere inside the arena changes. At first, there are too many people to understand every threat. Later, every remaining tribute becomes important. The people Haymitch once considered distant possibilities are now direct obstacles between him and freedom. The arena also becomes increasingly psychological. Hunger, exhaustion, and fear begin affecting everyone's judgment. A person who seems calm one day may become desperate the next. Someone who appears trustworthy may make a completely different decision after going without food or sleep. Haymitch learns that the physical environment is only half the battle. The other half is understanding how fear changes people. His own fear changes him as well. There are moments when he has to do things that the younger version of himself would never have imagined. The games force him to make decisions faster than he can emotionally process them. There is no time to mourn every loss. There is no safe place where he can stop and think about what has happened. The moment he hesitates, another tribute can take advantage of him. This constant pressure begins creating the Haymitch audiences will eventually recognize, but there is still a difference. He still cares. That may actually be his greatest weakness. The people he becomes attached to can be used against him, and the Capitol understands this better than anyone. The games are not only about putting weapons in an arena. They are about finding emotional pressure points and pushing them until people break. This is why the relationships surrounding Haymitch become so important. The people he meets during this experience are not simply there to fill the arena with more characters. They represent different possibilities for the person Haymitch could become. Some show him what loyalty looks like. Others show him what desperation can do. Some remind him that kindness is still possible, while others force him to accept that not everyone can be trusted. Every relationship leaves a mark. As the games continue, Haymitch becomes more aware of the fact that the Capitol is watching everything. He begins to understand that the arena itself is not necessarily as random as it appears. Certain dangers seem designed to push tributes in specific directions. The environment can separate allies, expose weaknesses, and create confrontations at exactly the right moment. The more he observes, the more suspicious he becomes. Haymitch starts looking for a pattern. If the Capitol created this arena, then the arena has rules beyond the obvious ones. The tributes may not know all of them, but the people controlling the games do. That means survival may depend on discovering something the Capitol does not want him to notice. This becomes a turning point in Haymitch's journey. Instead of simply reacting to the arena, he starts trying to understand it. That shift separates him from many of the other tributes. While they are focused on surviving the next hour, Haymitch begins thinking about what the arena is trying to make them do. He watches where the dangers appear. He notices how the tributes are pushed together and separated. He studies the environment whenever he has the chance. For the Capitol audience, these moments may simply look like another contestant hiding and thinking. For Haymitch, they are becoming a strategy. And eventually, that strategy will put him directly against the system controlling the games. The closer Haymitch gets to the truth, the more dangerous his position becomes. The Capitol can tolerate a strong tribute. It can tolerate a clever tribute. What it cannot easily tolerate is a tribute who understands that the rules are not as absolute as they appear. Haymitch does not yet know exactly how far this realization will take him. He only knows that something about the arena is wrong, and once he begins following that suspicion, the games stop being a simple fight between tributes. They become a battle between Haymitch and the people who believe they control his fate. Every step forward brings him closer to the final confrontation, but it also brings him closer to losing the parts of himself he is trying so desperately to protect. The Capitol may eventually give him the title of victor, but Haymitch is beginning to realize that there may be no real victory waiting for him at the end. There is only survival, and survival has a price. The more Haymitch studies the arena, the more he realizes that simply staying alive is not enough. The other tributes are becoming easier to understand, but the arena itself remains unpredictable. Every time he thinks he has figured out how one part of it works, something changes. The Capitol wants the tributes confused, exhausted, and frightened, because frightened people make mistakes. Haymitch knows that if he allows fear to control his decisions, he will eventually make one of those mistakes himself. So he starts conserving his energy. Instead of moving constantly, he chooses his moments carefully. He avoids unnecessary fights and stays away from situations where there is nothing to gain. This makes him look weaker to some of the other tributes, but that is exactly what he wants. If people underestimate him, they are less likely to consider him a serious threat. It is a dangerous strategy because patience can easily become isolation. The longer Haymitch remains on his own, the more vulnerable he becomes to hunger and exhaustion. He needs supplies, but getting them means taking risks. He needs information, but information usually comes from other people. And he needs rest, even though there is no place in the arena where he can truly feel safe. Eventually, circumstances force him back toward the other tributes. Some of them have started forming stronger groups, and their presence changes the balance of power inside the arena. The tributes with numbers begin believing they can control certain areas, while those without allies are forced to stay hidden. Haymitch understands that these groups are dangerous, but he also understands something else. Large groups are not always stronger. They are simply louder. The more people there are in an alliance, the more difficult it becomes to keep everyone satisfied. Different personalities begin clashing. Everyone has different ideas about where to go, what to take, and who should be trusted. Fear creates arguments, and arguments create mistakes. Haymitch watches those mistakes carefully. He does not need to defeat an entire group by himself. He only needs to understand how the group will eventually fall apart. That ability to read people becomes one of his greatest advantages. Haymitch notices things other people ignore. A hesitation before answering a question. A sudden change in someone's behavior. The way a person holds a weapon when they are nervous. These small details tell him more than words ever could. But while Haymitch becomes better at understanding everyone around him, the games are also changing him. At the beginning, he could still imagine that everything would eventually return to normal. He could think about home and pretend that the nightmare would end and life would continue. Now that hope is becoming harder to hold on to. Every death makes the arena feel smaller. Every loss reminds him that there is no guarantee that the people he cares about will survive. The capital continues broadcasting the games, turning each tragedy into another dramatic moment. In the districts, families are forced to watch. They cannot simply look away. The faces of the tributes appear on screens while people back home wait helplessly, knowing that there is nothing they can do. For Haymitch, that invisible audience becomes important. He starts thinking about what people outside the arena might be seeing. If he can control how the capital audience sees him, perhaps he can control what they are willing to give him. A sponsor might send medicine. Food could appear at exactly the right moment. Something as simple as water could become the difference between life and death. This means Haymitch has to become a performer without becoming someone he is not. That is difficult. He does not have the natural charm of a capital celebrity, and he certainly does not want to pretend that he enjoys what is happening. But he slowly learns that authenticity can also attract attention. If the audience sees someone who feels real, someone who is frightened but refuses to surrender, they may become emotionally invested. That creates another kind of danger. The more people care about him, the more valuable he becomes to the games. The capital wants characters. It wants heroes, villains, underdogs, and dramatic moments. Haymitch may not realize it yet, but his survival is becoming part of the story the capital is creating for its audience. And the moment he becomes interesting, the games become even more dangerous. The game makers have control over the arena, and they can change the environment whenever they need to create more excitement. Haymitch begins to understand that the tributes are not necessarily being allowed to hide forever. If too many people survive, the game makers can force them together. If the action slows down, they can introduce another threat. The arena is not simply a battlefield. It is a stage, and someone is controlling the lights. This realization makes Haymitch even more careful. He begins questioning whether certain events are coincidences or deliberately planned. When tributes are pushed toward one another, he watches where they are being directed. When a dangerous area suddenly becomes unavoidable, he looks for the reason. The more he notices, the more he understands that survival depends on predicting the people behind the arena. But predicting them is not the same as defeating them. The capital has been running the Hunger Games for years, and the people controlling the event know exactly how to manipulate frightened teenagers. They understand human behavior. They know that hunger creates desperation. They know that isolation creates paranoia. They know that fear can turn friends into enemies. Haymitch has to fight all of those things at once. And then there are the people he cannot stop thinking about. Memories of home begin appearing at the worst possible moments. A familiar voice, a place he used to visit, someone waiting for him, Small details from his old life suddenly feel more important than anything else in the arena. Before the games, those things were ordinary. Now they are priceless. That is what makes the capital's system so cruel. It takes ordinary people, removes them from their lives, and then forces them to fight for the right to return to those lives. The promise of freedom is used as motivation, while the capital controls every part of the process. Haymitch begins understanding that the real objective is not simply to win. The real objective is to refuse, to let the games decide who he is. That becomes harder after another major confrontation changes the balance inside the arena. Haymitch is forced to act quickly. There is no perfect choice available. Every option carries a risk, and hesitation could cost him his life. He makes a decision based on instinct, and for a moment, it works. But surviving one dangerous situation does not mean the danger is over. The consequences follow him. Other tributes begin paying closer attention to him. The person they previously underestimated is now becoming someone they have to consider. That changes everything. Haymitch can no longer move unnoticed. He has become a target. This is exactly what he was trying to avoid. Now he has to change his strategy again. Instead of hiding completely, he begins using the attention against his enemies. If they believe they know where he is going, he can make them expect something else. If they think he is afraid of a particular area, he can use that assumption to move them where he wants. It is not physical strength. It is psychological warfare. And Haymitch is getting very good at it. But there is one thing he cannot control: the emotional cost. Each victory feels less like a victory. Every time he escapes danger, another person is left behind. Every time he finds food, he remembers that someone else may be starving. Every time the capital celebrates his survival, he becomes more aware that people are cheering for something horrifying. This contradiction begins eating away at him. The audience sees a survivor. Haymitch sees a teenager who is slowly being forced to become someone he does not recognize. And the people running the games do not care about that difference. As the number of tributes continues to decrease, the capital begins focusing more heavily on the remaining contestants. The audience wants bigger confrontations. The game makers want a memorable ending. The pressure increases from every direction. Haymitch knows that the final stages will be the most dangerous. There will be fewer places to hide, fewer people to use as distractions. Fewer opportunities to escape. And eventually, everyone remaining will be forced into the same fight. But Haymitch has already discovered something that could change everything. The arena has weaknesses. Not obvious weaknesses, but patterns. Certain things happen for a reason. Certain dangers appear at particular moments. The environment behaves in ways that suggest the game makers are following a system. If Haymitch can understand that system completely, he may have a chance to do something no one expects. Not simply survive the arena. Beat it. The problem is that every step closer to that discovery increases the risk that someone else will notice what he is doing. And if the capital realizes that Haymitch is no longer simply playing the games but studying the games themselves, they may decide that he has become too dangerous to leave alone. For the first time, Haymitch begins to understand the true scale of the battle. The other tributes are fighting him. The arena is fighting him. The capital is watching him. And somewhere behind all of it, the people controlling the games are waiting to see exactly how far this boy from District 12 is willing to go. Haymitch has survived this long because he has refused to play the game exactly as they expected. Now, he has to decide whether he is willing to break the rules completely. By this point in Haymitch's story, the most important thing is no longer simply the question of whether he can survive. The 50th Hunger Games are built around a cruel idea, one that makes this particular edition of the games especially significant. The Second Quarter Quell forces twice as many tributes from each district into the arena, turning an already terrifying event into something even more overwhelming. For Haymitch, that means there are more opponents, more uncertainty, and more opportunities for the capital to manipulate the situation. But there is another reason these games matter. Haymitch is not just another tribute who happens to survive. His experience eventually becomes part of the history that shapes the Hunger Games years later. When audiences first met him in the original story, there were obvious questions surrounding his past. He was a victor, but his victory clearly came at a terrible cost. Sunrise on the Reaping finally gives that past a central place in the story. The younger Haymitch is also important because he represents everything the older version has lost. Before the games, he is not simply a broken man waiting for the next group of tributes to arrive. He is someone with his own life, relationships, and ambitions. The arena threatens to take all of that away from him. That is what makes his journey different from a traditional hero story. Haymitch is not entering the games because he wants to become famous. He does not dream about becoming a capital celebrity. He has no reason to believe that winning will make his life better. The capital has simply decided that his life can be turned into entertainment. And the more Haymitch understands that, the harder it becomes for him to accept the rules. The games are presented as a competition, but the reality is much darker. The capital controls almost every important part of the event, from the selection of tributes to the presentation of their stories and the conditions inside the arena. The districts are expected to watch their children fight while knowing that the entire system has been designed to remind them of their powerlessness. Haymitch's situation becomes even more painful because District 12 has very little political influence compared with the wealthier districts. The capital does not expect someone from District 12 to challenge the system. It expects him to be another frightened teenager who either dies quickly or becomes a temporary source of entertainment. But Haymitch has already shown that he cannot be easily controlled. His intelligence becomes more important as the games progress. He understands that strength alone will not guarantee survival. The people who appear strongest can become obvious targets, while someone who is underestimated can remain alive much longer. Haymitch's ability to observe people allows him to recognize opportunities that others might miss. That intelligence also creates tension because it makes him harder to predict. A tribute who follows the expected pattern is easier for the game makers to control. A tribute who thinks independently creates uncertainty, and uncertainty is something the capital does not like. The audience watching the games may believe that they are seeing a simple contest between young people, but Haymitch gradually becomes aware that there is another contest happening underneath it. The tributes are trying to survive the arena, while the capital is trying to control the story being told about them. That distinction matters. If the capital can decide who looks heroic, who looks dangerous, and who looks weak, then it can influence how the audience reacts. A tribute who receives sympathy may gain sponsors. A tribute who becomes unpopular may be forgotten. The games therefore become partly a battle for attention. Haymitch has to navigate that world without allowing it to completely change him. And this is where the emotional side of the story becomes unavoidable. The people Haymitch cares about outside the arena are constantly in his thoughts. They represent the life that existed before the reaping. They remind him that he is more than a tribute number, and more than a character on a capital screen. The capital can control the arena. It cannot completely control what Haymitch remembers. Those memories become a source of strength, but they also create vulnerability. The more someone has to lose, the easier it becomes to hurt them. The capital has always understood that fear works best when people care about something. This is one of the reasons the Hunger Games are so effective as a system of control. The capital does not need to personally threaten every citizen in every district. It only needs everyone to understand what could happen if they resist. Haymitch's generation has grown up under that fear. He knows what the capital is capable of, but he has never experienced its cruelty from inside the arena. Now he is seeing it from a completely different perspective. The games also force him to confront an uncomfortable reality about survival. Sometimes the person who survives is not necessarily the strongest or the most deserving. Sometimes survival depends on timing. Sometimes it depends on luck. Sometimes it depends on making a decision that will stay with you for the rest of your life. Haymitch begins learning all three lessons, and as the story moves deeper into the Second Quarter Quell, the difference between winning and losing becomes increasingly complicated. A victor leaves the arena alive, but that does not mean the capital lets them return to a normal life. Winning creates a new kind of relationship with the capital. The victor becomes a symbol, a celebrity, and a reminder of the games. They may receive wealth and recognition, but they also become permanently connected to the system that forced them to kill. For Haymitch, that future is especially tragic because audiences already know the older version of him. They know he will eventually become someone who uses alcohol to escape his memories. They know he will appear cynical and detached. They know he will have difficulty trusting people. But seeing those traits after knowing what happened to him changes the way they are understood. His behavior is not simply part of his personality. It is the result of everything that came before. That makes every moment of the Second Quarter Quell carry more weight. A seemingly small decision can become the beginning of something that affects Haymitch for decades. The story also expands the world of Panem beyond Katniss's generation. The districts are still under the capital's control, but the political environment is different. The rebellion that eventually becomes central to Katniss's story has not yet reached the same point. The capital's power appears almost absolute. That makes Haymitch's experience even more important. He is living in a time when open resistance seems almost impossible. There is no obvious path toward freedom. There is only the choice between obedience and survival. And yet, the Hunger Games themselves create unexpected consequences. Every year, the capital puts young people into an arena to demonstrate its power. But every year, those same games also create stories of courage, sacrifice, and defiance. The capital wants to show that it controls the districts. But sometimes the tributes remind the audience that even inside the most controlled environment, people can still make their own choices. Haymitch's story exists somewhere inside that contradiction. He is not trying to become a symbol. He is trying to stay alive. But sometimes the most powerful symbols are created by people who never intended to become them. As the second quarter Quell moves toward its later stages, the pressure on Haymitch becomes greater. The number of people around him decreases. The risks become more serious, and the possibility of returning home begins to feel both closer and more distant at the same time. He can see the end of the games approaching, but he cannot yet see what comes after. That is the cruelest part. Every tribute dreams about leaving the arena, but Haymitch will eventually discover that leaving the arena does not mean leaving the games behind. The capital has a long memory. Victors remain connected to the system, and their past can follow them wherever they go. For Haymitch, the arena will eventually become a memory that refuses to stay in the past, and that is why Sunrise on the Reaping is more than a story about how a young man won a Hunger Games. It is the story of how a victor was created. The title itself points toward that painful beginning. The Reaping is only the moment when Haymitch's name is called, but the consequences of that moment will continue long after the cameras stop recording. For the people watching from the capital, the 50th Hunger Games will eventually become another historic spectacle. For Haymitch, they will become the event that divides his life into two parts: the person he was before the arena, and the person he became after. And as he moves closer to the final stages of the games, that transformation is becoming impossible to stop. The boy who entered the arena still believes that survival will allow him to return to the life he once knew. He has not yet discovered the hardest truth of all. One of the most interesting things about Haymitch's story is that audiences already know the man he will become, but they do not yet know the experiences that shaped him. That gives Sunrise on the Reaping a very different kind of tension. In a normal prequel, the audience may wonder whether a character will survive. Here, survival is already part of the history. The real mystery is what happens between the moment Haymitch's name is called and the moment he eventually returns home as a victor. The 50th Hunger Games are remembered as one of the most significant editions of the games because they introduced the Second Quarter Quell. Every 25 years, the capital changes the rules of the Hunger Games to make the event even more brutal and politically meaningful. For the 50th Games, the districts are forced to send twice the usual number of tributes. That single change immediately creates a completely different scale of danger. For Haymitch, this means that the arena contains far more potential enemies than the games normally would. It also means that alliances become more complicated. With more tributes competing, there are more personalities, more strategies, and more opportunities for betrayal. A person might believe they have found safety with a group, only to realize that the same group could become dangerous later. The Quarter Quell rules also demonstrate something important about the capital. The games are not simply an annual tradition that happens to become violent. They are deliberately designed to remind the districts that the capital has complete control. Every 25 years, the government has the opportunity to change the rules and create a new form of fear. The 50th Games take that idea further than ever before. The capital wants the districts to understand that even a system they have already learned to fear can become worse. There is no guarantee that next year's games will follow the same rules as the previous ones. The capital can change everything whenever it wants. That uncertainty is one of the most powerful weapons it possesses. Haymitch is therefore entering an environment where the rules are already stacked against him. He is not simply competing against other teenagers. He is competing against an entire political system that has spent years perfecting the art of turning violence into entertainment. And yet, the story is not only about the capital. Haymitch's relationships are central to understanding who he was before becoming the man audiences know. His connection to his home and the people around him gives the character an emotional foundation that is often missing when we first meet him in the original story. Before the games, Haymitch has reasons to care about the future. That is important because the older Haymitch often behaves as if the future no longer matters. Seeing the difference between these two versions of him is what gives the prequel much of its emotional power. The audience knows that something will eventually happen to destroy the optimism and emotional openness that still exists in the younger Haymitch. The question is how much of that person will remain when the games are finished. Another major part of the story is the presence of characters who surround Haymitch during this period of his life. The book introduces people who are important to his journey and who help reveal different sides of his personality. Among them is Lenore Dove Baird, a character whose relationship with Haymitch becomes particularly significant. Her presence gives the story something that the arena itself cannot provide, a connection to the life Haymitch might have had if the Capitol had never chosen him. That possibility matters. When a character has something meaningful waiting for them outside the arena, survival becomes more than simply escaping death. It becomes an attempt to return to a future that still feels possible, but the Hunger Games are designed to destroy that possibility. The Capitol separates Haymitch from the people he knows, puts him in front of millions of viewers and forces him into a situation where his own survival may require choices that conflict with his personal values. That conflict becomes one of the central emotional ideas of the story. Haymitch's intelligence also becomes more understandable when we see him at a younger age. In the original trilogy, he is often treated as someone who has an unusual understanding of the games. He knows how the Capitol works, understands how sponsors think, and can recognize dangers that younger tributes may not notice. Sunrise on the Reaping gives audiences the chance to see where that knowledge came from. It is not knowledge Haymitch simply received from someone else. He earned it through experience. The 50th Hunger Games become his education in the Capitol's system. Every decision teaches him something about power, fear, and manipulation. Every loss changes the way he sees the world. This is also why the story can deepen the meaning of his relationship with Katniss and Peeta years later. When Haymitch becomes their mentor, he is not simply giving them advice based on what he remembers from his own games. He is responding to a lifetime of experience. He knows exactly what the Capitol wants from them. He knows how quickly a tribute can become a piece of entertainment. And he knows what happens when someone survives the games but loses everything that made survival worthwhile. That knowledge makes his behavior in the original story much more understandable. He pushes Katniss and Peeta to think strategically because he understands that bravery alone will not protect them. He pays attention to sponsors because he knows that public sympathy can become a practical advantage. He understands the importance of presentation because he has already experienced what it means to be turned into a character for the Capitol audience. All of those lessons begin here. The arena therefore becomes a classroom, although it is a classroom no teenager should ever have to enter. Haymitch is learning how to survive while the Capitol is learning how to control him. That relationship becomes increasingly important as the story develops. The Capitol does not necessarily need Haymitch to understand everything. It only needs him to follow the rules. A tribute who accepts the system is easy to manage. A tribute who begins questioning the system creates complications. Haymitch's greatest strength is that he does not stop thinking. Even when he is frightened, he observes. Even when he is exhausted, he notices details. Even when the situation seems hopeless, he looks for another possibility. That mindset is what eventually separates him from many of the people around him. But intelligence has a cost. The more Haymitch understands, the more clearly he sees how unfair the entire situation is. Ignorance can sometimes protect a person emotionally. Haymitch does not have that protection. He sees the machinery behind the spectacle. He understands that the people in the Capitol are watching because they enjoy the games. He understands that the districts are watching because they have no choice. And he understands that the tributes are trapped between those two audiences. That realization makes it impossible for him to view the games as an ordinary competition. The more he learns, the more the Capitol begins to look different. Its wealth, its celebrations, and its obsession with appearances all exist in contrast to what is happening in the arena. The Capitol can decorate the games with beautiful costumes and elaborate ceremonies, but none of that changes what the tributes are experiencing. This contrast has always been one of the defining elements of the Hunger Games. Sunrise on the Reaping uses Haymitch's story to explore it from another angle. Katniss eventually becomes a symbol because she openly challenges the Capitol. Haymitch becomes something different. He learns how to survive inside the system while quietly recognizing its weaknesses. That is why his story is so important to the larger history of Panem. He represents a generation that survived before Katniss, a generation that experienced the games when the Capitol still appeared almost impossible to challenge, and a generation whose suffering helped create the people and circumstances that would eventually lead to open rebellion. The 50th Hunger Games therefore sit at an important point in the timeline. They are far enough in the past to show a different Panem, but close enough to Katniss's era that the consequences still matter. Haymitch's victory becomes part of that connection. When he eventually returns to District 12, he will carry the title of victor, but that title cannot erase what happened inside the arena. In fact, it may make the memories harder to escape. The Capitol will want to celebrate him. The districts will see him as someone who survived. But Haymitch will know what survival actually required. And that difference between what people see and what Haymitch knows will become one of the defining elements of his character. The boy who enters the arena may still believe that winning will give him his life back. The older Haymitch knows better. By the time he becomes the mentor, audiences remember he has learned that the Hunger Games do not truly end when the victor walks out of the arena. For some people, the arena follows them for the rest of their lives. And Haymitch's story is about to show exactly why. For Haymitch, the most painful part of the 50th Hunger Games is not simply being trapped inside an arena. It is knowing that the people he cares about are somewhere outside, watching a version of him that they cannot help. Every decision he makes becomes part of a story that other people are seeing from a distance, while Haymitch is the only one experiencing the reality of it. That separation becomes one of the most important ideas surrounding his character. Inside the arena, survival requires focus. Outside the arena, people are forced to wait and watch. Neither side has control over what happens next. Families can hope their loved ones survive, but hope cannot change the rules. The Capitol has created a situation where everyone is forced to participate simply by watching. For Haymitch, that makes the idea of home increasingly complicated. Home is the reason he wants to survive, but thinking about home also reminds him of everything he could lose. His relationship with Lenore Dove becomes particularly important in this context. She represents a part of Haymitch's life that exists outside the games and outside the Capitol's control. Their connection gives the audience a better understanding of the person Haymitch was before the arena became the defining event of his life. That relationship also makes the consequences of the games feel more personal. Haymitch is not fighting simply because he wants to be called a victor. He has something waiting for him. There is a life he wants to return to, and that makes the Capitol's decision to place him in the arena even more cruel. The Capitol does not care what kind of future he had imagined. Once his name is selected, that future becomes secondary to the games. This is exactly how the Capitol maintains control over the districts. It turns individual lives into political messages. The reaping tells every family that their children can be taken away at any moment. The arena tells everyone watching that resistance has consequences. And the spectacle surrounding the games makes the entire process appear normal. Haymitch's story exposes how unnatural that system really is. He is still young enough to remember what ordinary life feels like. That makes the contrast between his old life and the arena especially powerful. The audience can see that the Capitol is not destroying some abstract character. It is taking a real person with hopes, relationships, and plans and forcing him into an environment where those things become weaknesses. The longer the games continue, the more Haymitch has to separate emotion from decision-making. That does not mean he stops caring. It means he learns that caring cannot always determine what he does next. This is an important part of his development, because the older Haymitch is often criticized for appearing cold or detached, but the younger version helps explain why that distance eventually becomes necessary. When a person experiences enough loss, emotional distance can become a form of protection. The games begin teaching Haymitch that lesson long before he returns to District 12. He learns that every friendship has a risk, every promise has a limit. And every moment of happiness can be followed by something devastating. That does not make him cruel. It makes him cautious. His intelligence becomes more valuable as the arena becomes increasingly unpredictable. He has to think about resources, positioning, and the behavior of the other tributes. But he also has to think about what the game makers want. That second part separates the Hunger Games from an ordinary survival situation. If Haymitch were simply lost in a dangerous environment, the smartest strategy would be to avoid other people and find a safe place. But the Hunger Games are designed to prevent that. The game makers can manipulate the environment to create action, and the capital audience expects a show. Haymitch therefore has to survive both the physical danger and the entertainment machine surrounding it. That creates an unusual kind of psychological pressure. He knows that being noticed can help him because sponsors may become interested, but being noticed can also make him a bigger target. He needs attention, but not too much. He needs allies, but not so many that he becomes trapped by them. He needs to show strength, but not so much that everyone decides he is the person they have to eliminate. Every decision has two sides. That is what makes Haymitch's approach to the game so interesting. He is constantly balancing contradictions. He has to appear vulnerable without becoming helpless. He has to appear strong without becoming threatening. He has to trust people without becoming dependent on them. And he has to remain emotionally connected to the reason he wants to survive without allowing those emotions to destroy his judgment. The Capitol has created a game where there is no perfect strategy. Haymitch simply becomes better at choosing the least dangerous option. As the story progresses, his understanding of the Capitol also becomes deeper. He begins to see that the games are not designed only to punish the districts. They are designed to create a narrative. The Capitol wants winners that audiences can celebrate. It wants villains that audiences can hate. It wants moments that people will remember. The tributes become characters before they even understand what is happening. This is especially significant for someone like Haymitch because his personality does not naturally fit the image the Capitol might want from a victor. He is not someone who easily accepts being turned into a product. That creates tension between Haymitch and the world around him. He may be able to play along when necessary, but he does not completely surrender his identity. And that resistance, even when it is subtle, becomes part of what makes him dangerous. The Capitol can control his circumstances. It cannot fully control what he thinks. That distinction becomes more important as he gets closer to understanding the structure of the arena. The arena is not random. Its dangers are not simply scattered around without purpose. Everything has been designed. The terrain, the threats, the available resources, and the movement of the tributes all contribute to the story the game makers want to create. Haymitch begins recognizing that if he can understand the design, he can potentially predict what happens next. That does not make him invincible. It simply gives him something the Capitol does not expect from a tribute, a way of thinking beyond the immediate moment. While other tributes may be focused on reaching the next safe location, Haymitch can begin thinking about why that location exists in the first place. Why was that resource placed there? Why are certain tributes being pushed together? Why does the arena force people into particular areas? These questions may seem small, but together they can reveal the logic behind the games. And once someone understands the logic of a system, they can begin looking for ways around it. This is where Haymitch's story becomes more than a survival story. He is beginning to recognize that the Capitol's greatest weakness may be its confidence. The people controlling the games believe they have thought of everything. They believe the tributes will behave according to fear. They believe the audience will accept whatever story they create. They believe the districts will continue watching. But Haymitch is learning that people do not always behave exactly as expected. Sometimes desperation produces courage. Sometimes fear produces intelligence. And sometimes a person who has nothing left to lose becomes much harder to control. The danger is that Haymitch still has something to lose. He has people he loves. He has a home he wants to return to. He has a future he can still imagine. That means the Capitol can still hurt him. And eventually, that possibility will become one of the defining tragedies of his story. The games are moving toward their inevitable conclusion, but the closer Haymitch gets to victory, the more complicated that victory becomes. Every step toward survival takes him further away from the person he was when he entered the arena. He may eventually leave as a victor, but the real question is whether the person who leaves is still the same boy who entered, because the Capitol may not need to kill Haymitch to defeat him. It only needs to make him believe that there is nothing left worth fighting for. And as the final stages of the 50th Hunger Games approach, that becomes the battle Haymitch must fight harder than any opponent in the arena. He is fighting for his life. But somewhere beneath that struggle, he is also fighting to preserve the part of himself that the Capitol has not yet managed to take away. The closer Haymitch gets to the heart of the 50th Hunger Games, the more obvious it becomes that the arena is testing much more than physical strength. The capital has created an environment where every advantage comes with a risk, and every decision can have consequences that are impossible to predict. Haymitch's ability to stay calm and observe the situation becomes increasingly valuable. But even intelligence has limits when the entire environment is designed to work against you. What makes Haymitch different is that he refuses to look at the arena as a simple collection of obstacles. He tries to understand the reason behind them. The more he studies his surroundings, the more he realizes that the game makers are constantly influencing where the tributes move and how they interact with one another. The arena is supposed to feel like a world, but Haymitch begins seeing it as a machine. That difference changes the way he approaches everything. Instead of asking only where he should go, he begins asking why the arena is pushing him in a particular direction. Instead of simply looking for food or shelter, he considers what those resources might mean. If something appears too easy to obtain, there may be a reason for it. If a location seems unusually safe, that safety may not last. Haymitch learns to distrust convenience. That lesson becomes valuable as the number of tributes decreases. With fewer people remaining, every survivor becomes more important to the capital audience. The game makers need the remaining tributes to keep the games exciting, and that means the pressure around them can only increase. For Haymitch, this creates another problem. The longer he survives, the harder it becomes to remain invisible. At the beginning, being underestimated was an advantage. Now, his survival itself has made him noticeable. People are beginning to recognize that he is not simply lucky, he has been making decisions. Good decisions. And that makes him dangerous. Other tributes may not understand exactly how he thinks, but they can see the results. A person who repeatedly escapes situations that should have killed him becomes someone others have to take seriously. Haymitch therefore has to change his approach again. He cannot depend entirely on hiding. He has to control how other people see him. This is where the performance aspect of the Hunger Games becomes more important. The capital audience is constantly forming opinions about the tributes. Those opinions can influence sponsorship, which can influence survival. A tribute who appears sympathetic may receive help. A tribute who appears threatening may receive none. Haymitch has to understand this invisible relationship between the arena and the audience. But there is something else he has to understand. The audience does not know everything. They see the edited version of the games that the capital wants them to see. They may watch a confrontation without knowing what caused it. They may celebrate a victory without understanding what it cost. They may laugh at a moment that is horrifying to the person experiencing it. That difference between reality and presentation is one of the central contradictions of Panem. The capital can control the broadcast, but it cannot completely control the truth. Haymitch's experience begins exposing that truth. Every time he survives, he demonstrates that the tributes are not simply helpless pieces on a board. They can observe, adapt, and make choices the game makers did not expect. That does not mean Haymitch can defeat the capital. Not yet. But he can refuse to make things easy for them. The emotional pressure continues building as well. The memories of District 12 become more powerful because the arena has made ordinary life seem almost impossible. Things that once felt insignificant now become symbols of freedom. A familiar place, a person waiting at home, a simple conversation. All of these memories remind Haymitch that life existed before the games. The capital has taken him away from that life, but it has not erased it from his mind. That becomes one of the reasons he keeps going. At the same time, Haymitch begins to understand that survival may require accepting painful realities. Not everyone can be saved. Not every relationship can continue. Not every decision will have a good outcome. This is one of the hardest lessons for someone who still has hope. The older Haymitch often appears as if he has already accepted that reality. The younger Haymitch has not. He still wants to believe that there is a way for everyone to escape. The arena keeps challenging that belief. And each challenge forces him to make a choice between what he wants to be and what he needs to do. That internal conflict is what makes his journey more compelling than a simple sequence of fights. The physical danger matters, but the psychological transformation matters more. Every day inside the arena pushes him closer to becoming the person the audience already knows. But there are still moments when the old Haymitch appears, moments when he cares, moments when he takes a risk for someone else, moments when he refuses to accept that Survival must always mean becoming cruel. Those moments are important because they show that the capital does not completely destroy him. Something survives. That something will eventually matter years later. The capital may believe that the games teach people obedience. But Haymitch learns something else. He learns how power works. He learns that people in control often become predictable because they are confident in their own system. He learns that appearances matter. He learns that information can be more valuable than strength. And most importantly, he learns that a person does not always have to fight the system directly to challenge it. Sometimes the smartest move is to understand the system better than the people controlling it. That knowledge will eventually make Haymitch valuable as a mentor, but at this moment, he is still only a tribute trying to survive. And the capital is not finished with him. As the games move toward their final stages, the pressure surrounding the remaining tributes becomes more intense. The audience wants a conclusion. The game makers want memorable moments. The capital wants a victor who can be celebrated. As proof that the games work exactly as intended, Haymitch's survival is becoming part of that narrative. But Haymitch does not see himself as the hero of a capital story. He sees himself as someone trying to get home. That difference is crucial. The capital wants to define what his victory means. Haymitch will eventually have to decide what it means to him. The closer he comes to the end, the more complicated that question becomes, because even if he wins, the people who control the games will still exist. The capital will still be there. The districts will still be under its control. And Haymitch will still have to live with everything he has seen. The idea of victory therefore begins to lose some of its meaning. He can win the competition, but he cannot undo the losses. He cannot erase the memories. He cannot return to the exact person he was before the reaping. And he cannot make the capital disappear. All he can do is survive, yet that may be more powerful than it sounds. For someone the capital expected to become another statistic, staying alive is already a form of resistance. Haymitch's greatest achievement may not be defeating another tribute. It may be refusing to let the capital completely define him. As the remaining tributes are pushed closer toward the final confrontation, Haymitch's understanding of the arena becomes more important than ever. The environment is closing in around them, and there are fewer opportunities to disappear. The games are running out of space. They are running out of contestants, and they are running out of time. Soon, Haymitch will have to make the decisions that will determine how the history of the 50th Hunger Games remembers him. But history will only remember the victor. It will not immediately understand the person who had to become that victor. That is the tragedy waiting at the end of Haymitch's journey. The capital will eventually announce a winner. The audience will celebrate. The cameras will capture the moment. But behind that celebration will be a young man who has learned that surviving the Hunger Games is not the same thing as escaping them. And before Haymitch can return home, he still has to face the final part of the arena. The part where there are fewer places to hide, fewer people to trust, and nowhere left to run. Fewer people to trust and nowhere left to run. By the time the 50th Hunger Games reach their most dangerous stage, Haymitch is no longer the same teenager who arrived in the arena. He has learned how quickly an alliance can disappear, how easily the capital can turn suffering into entertainment, and how important it is to think beyond the obvious danger in front of him. But there is still one thing he has not fully understood. The arena itself is hiding a much bigger secret. The Second Quarter Quell arena is unlike anything Haymitch has experienced before. Its design is built around a massive clock, and that structure is not simply there to make the arena look impressive. Different sections of the arena contain different dangers, and those dangers operate according to a pattern. At first, the tributes have no reason to believe that the pattern itself could be the key to survival. Haymitch, however, is the kind of person who notices patterns. The arena constantly forces the tributes to move, and every new section presents another threat. What makes the situation especially terrifying is that these dangers are not always obvious. A place can appear safe for a few moments before becoming deadly. The tributes have to learn quickly or pay for their mistakes. For Haymitch, observation becomes more important than ever. He begins paying attention not only to what happens, but when it happens. That distinction matters because the arena is operating according to a schedule. The clock becomes more than a symbol. It becomes a warning. As Haymitch and the other surviving tributes try to understand their surroundings, the pressure between them continues to grow. They know there can ultimately be only one victor, but the circumstances inside this particular arena make cooperation almost unavoidable. One of the people closest to Haymitch during the games is Maisily Donner, another tribute from District 12. Their connection is complicated by the fact that they come from the same district but have very different reasons for being there. Maisily is not simply another person Haymitch can treat as an enemy. Her presence reminds him that the capital has placed people from the same home against each other. That makes every decision more difficult. The relationship between Haymitch and Maisily also helps reveal the kind of person he is underneath the survival instinct. He can be sarcastic, stubborn, and difficult, but he is not naturally heartless. When he develops trust with someone, that trust matters to him. And in the Hunger Games, caring about another person can be dangerous. The capital understands that emotional connections make better television. A friendship can become a storyline. A betrayal can become a dramatic moment. A death can become the emotional climax of an entire broadcast. The people inside the arena experience those events as trauma. The people watching experience them as entertainment. That contrast becomes harder for Haymitch to ignore. He also begins realizing that the capital's control over the games depends on the tributes believing that the arena is unbeatable. If the environment seems completely random, the tributes can only react. But if there is a pattern, then there is a possibility of prediction, and prediction creates an opportunity. Haymitch starts looking more closely at the clock. Each section appears to have its own danger, and the timing matters. Once the pattern becomes clearer, the arena stops looking like a collection of unrelated threats and starts looking like a mechanism. That discovery changes the way Haymitch moves. Instead of simply trying to find the safest location, he has to think about which danger is coming next. That requires concentration. And concentration is difficult when the body is exhausted. The games have already taken a physical toll on everyone. Hunger, injuries, fear, and lack of sleep make even simple decisions harder. Haymitch is not operating at his best anymore. He is surviving with whatever strength and focus he has left, but the closer he gets to understanding the arena, the more important that remaining focus becomes. There is another problem. The other tributes are also adapting. Some are stronger physically. Some have more experience with weapons. Some are willing to do things Haymitch is not. And some are unpredictable enough to create danger without even realizing it. Haymitch cannot simply assume that everyone will behave rationally. He has to account for fear. He has to account for desperation. And he has to account for the possibility that someone might make a decision that puts everyone else in danger. That is one reason alliances inside the games are always fragile. People may genuinely care about each other, but the capital has created circumstances where survival eventually forces impossible choices. Haymitch's connection with Maisily becomes especially important because she represents a different possibility for him. They are not simply fighting side by side because it is convenient. There is a genuine sense that they understand something about what the other person is going through. They both know what District 12 feels like. They both know what it means to be selected. And they both know that none of this was their choice. For a short time, that shared understanding gives Haymitch something the arena cannot easily take away: companionship. But the Hunger Games do not allow peaceful relationships to remain peaceful forever. Eventually, the arena forces the surviving tributes into situations where choices have consequences. The danger of the clock becomes more apparent, and Haymitch has to use everything he has learned. The arena is no longer something he can simply escape. It has to be understood. This is where the intelligence that defines Haymitch later in life becomes especially important. He does not need to know everything. He only needs to know enough to recognize the pattern, enough to understand where danger is coming from, enough to make a decision before everyone else realizes what is happening, and enough to recognize that the game makers may have accidentally created a weakness in their own design. The capital believes the arena gives it complete control, but a system built on predictable rules can sometimes be exploited by someone who understands those rules. Haymitch begins moving toward that possibility. At the same time, the emotional consequences are becoming harder to ignore. He knows that even if he reaches the end, the people who helped him get there may not. The idea of being the only person left alive is no longer an abstract part of the games. It is becoming a reality, and that is one of the cruelest aspects of being a victor. The person who survives is forced to carry memories of everyone who did not. For Haymitch, those memories will eventually become inseparable from his identity. This is why his future behavior makes more sense when seen through the events of the Second Quarter Quell. The bitterness, the drinking, and the emotional distance are not random characteristics. They are connected to a history that began long before Katniss ever entered the arena. But Haymitch has not reached that point yet. Right now, there is still a part of him that believes he can make it home and somehow return to the life he had before. That hope is becoming harder to maintain. The arena continues to close in. The clock continues to turn, and every passing cycle brings the surviving tributes closer to another confrontation. Haymitch now understands that the key to the arena may be hidden in plain sight. The Capitol has given the games a structure, a rhythm, and a pattern. It has created a machine designed to kill, but machines can have weaknesses. If Haymitch can find one, he may have a chance, but discovering a weakness is only the beginning. Using it could be even more dangerous. Because if Haymitch is right, then he is no longer simply trying to survive the Capitol's game. He is preparing to use the Capitol's own rules against it. And once that possibility enters his mind, the final stages of the 50th Hunger Games take on a completely different meaning. The question is no longer whether Haymitch can last another day. The question is whether he can turn the arena's greatest advantage into its greatest weakness. The answer will determine how he wins, and more importantly, it will help explain why the Capitol will never be able to look at Haymitch Abernathy as just another victor from District 12. Haymitch's discovery about the arena changes the entire way he sees the 50th Hunger Games. What initially looked like a collection of random dangers now begins to make sense. The arena is built around a pattern, and that pattern gives him something the Capitol never intended to give a tribute: predictability. The danger is still enormous, but predictability means there is a chance to prepare. Haymitch knows he cannot simply walk through the arena without consequences. The dangers are real, and the game makers have designed them to be deadly. But if each section follows a particular sequence, then surviving may depend on being in the right place at the right moment. That is a completely different kind of strategy. Instead of reacting after something happens, Haymitch can begin anticipating what comes next. This is where his natural intelligence becomes a serious advantage. He does not have the physical dominance of some tributes, but he has something that can be just as powerful: information. The more he understands the arena, the less control the arena has over him. But Haymitch is not the only person trying to survive. The remaining tributes are becoming increasingly desperate, and desperation makes people unpredictable. The closer they get to the end, the harder it becomes for alliances to remain stable. Everyone knows that the Capitol wants a winner, and everyone understands that only one person can ultimately receive that title. That reality hangs over every conversation. Even people who trust one another have to wonder how long that trust can survive. Haymitch and Maisali's relationship becomes more meaningful because of this pressure. Their connection is not based on the illusion that everything will work out. They understand the situation they are in. They know that the Capitol has created a competition where friendship and survival can eventually collide. Yet they continue helping each other. That decision says something important about Haymitch, even after everything he has experienced. He has not completely accepted the Capitol's belief that people must become selfish to survive. He still believes there is value in protecting someone else, and that belief is about to cost him. The arena continues cycling through its dangers. Each section has its own threat, and the clock determines when that threat appears. The pattern becomes increasingly clear, but knowing the pattern does not make the dangers harmless. A person can know exactly what is coming and still be unable to escape it. That is the problem Haymitch faces. He has information, but he also has limited time. His body is exhausted, his resources are running low, and every movement carries risk. The Capitol has created the arena so that knowledge alone is never enough. Still, Haymitch begins using what he knows to make decisions that others cannot. He understands that the safest place is not necessarily the place that looks safest. Sometimes, the obvious escape route is exactly where the game makers expect the tributes to go. Sometimes the most dangerous-looking area may be the only place where a person can avoid another threat. That way of thinking allows Haymitch to stay ahead, but it also makes him more noticeable. The people around him begin to realize that he understands something they do not. And once people realize someone has an advantage, they start asking how they can take it away. This is another problem Haymitch cannot solve with intelligence alone. Trust becomes increasingly difficult. He has to decide how much information to share and how much to keep to himself. If he tells everyone what he knows, they may use the information against him. If he keeps everything secret, he may lose the people who could help him survive. There is no perfect choice. The Capitol has designed the game so that even useful knowledge can become dangerous. As the pressure increases, the remaining tributes are pushed closer together. The arena does not allow them to remain separated forever. The game makers want confrontation. The audience wants a climax. And the Capitol wants the final moments of the games to become something people will remember. Haymitch realizes that the closer they get to the end, the less likely it is that he will be allowed to simply disappear. Sooner or later, the Capitol will force the remaining tributes into the same space. That means he has to prepare for a different kind of battle. Not a battle of endurance, a battle of timing. Haymitch's greatest advantage may be knowing when not to fight. If another tribute wants to attack him while the arena itself is becoming dangerous, the best response may not be to fight back immediately. Sometimes the environment can become the weapon. This is one of the lessons Haymitch is learning that will later make him such a complicated mentor. He does not simply teach people how to fight. He teaches them how to survive. There is a difference. Fighting is about defeating an opponent. Survival is about making sure you are still alive when the danger is over. Haymitch understands that the Capitol wants spectacle, but he wants something much simpler. He wants to leave. That goal becomes increasingly difficult as the games move toward their conclusion. The losses around him are becoming impossible to ignore. Every person who disappears from the arena leaves behind another reminder of what victory actually means. The Capitol may call the final survivor a champion. Haymitch knows there will be no celebration inside his own mind. The closer he gets to becoming a victor, the more he realizes that victory will not restore what has already been lost. That realization changes him. He begins separating the idea of winning from the idea of being saved. Winning means surviving. It does not mean being healed. It does not mean returning to normal. And it certainly does not mean forgetting. This distinction is crucial to understanding the older Haymitch. When audiences first meet him years later, he often appears uninterested in almost everything around him. But that attitude makes more sense when we understand that he has already experienced the consequences of being a victor. The Capitol gives its winners rewards, but those rewards come attached to memories that cannot be erased. Haymitch's victory will eventually make him a symbol of District 12, but he never asked to become one. The irony is that the Capitol may believe it is creating an example of successful survival, while Haymitch's experience teaches him exactly how cruel the system is. That knowledge will stay with him, and it may eventually become useful when another tribute from District 12 enters the games years later. Katniss will not understand everything Haymitch is trying to teach her. Peeta will not understand everything either, but Haymitch will know what they are facing because he has already lived through it. He knows what the Capitol does when it becomes afraid of losing control. He knows how quickly the audience can turn, and he knows that the most dangerous part of the games may not be the arena at all. It may be what happens after the cameras stop. For now, however, Haymitch is still inside the arena. The final survivors are getting closer to one another. The clock continues its cycle, the dangers continue appearing, and the opportunity Haymitch has been waiting for is beginning to take shape. He now understands enough of the arena to realize that its design can potentially be turned against itself. But using that knowledge will require a level of courage that goes beyond simply running from danger. He will have to make a choice. He can continue playing the games exactly as the Capitol expects, or he can take the knowledge he has gained and attempt something much more dangerous. Something that could give him a path to victory. But if it fails, there will be no second chance. The Capitol will not forgive a tribute for exposing the weakness of its most important spectacle. And Haymitch is about to find out exactly how far the people behind the games are willing to go to protect their illusion of absolute control. Haymitch now understands that the arena has a pattern, but understanding the pattern is only useful if he can turn that knowledge into a way out. The closer he gets to the end of the 50th Hunger Games, the more dangerous every decision becomes. There are fewer tributes, fewer places to hide, and fewer opportunities to make mistakes. For the first time, Haymitch begins thinking seriously about what victory will require. Not the kind of victory the Capitol wants to show its audience, but the kind that gets him out alive. The arena's clock remains at the center of his thinking. Each section has its own danger, and each danger follows a predictable cycle. If the pattern can be trusted, then the arena itself becomes a map of possibilities. The challenge is finding A moment when those possibilities overlap in Haymitch's favor. That requires patience. He cannot rush. He cannot allow fear to make him act too early. And most importantly, he cannot let the other tributes understand exactly what he has discovered. Knowledge has become his greatest weapon, but it is also his greatest secret. The people closest to him can sense that Haymitch knows more than he is saying. That creates tension even among allies. When someone is holding information back, trust becomes difficult. Yet Haymitch understands why he has to be careful. He is not trying to deceive people because he enjoys it. He is trying to survive. The difference matters to him, even if the people around him cannot always see it. Macy remains one of the most important people in Haymitch's world during this period. Their relationship gives him a reason to remain connected to another human being when the arena is constantly encouraging him to become isolated. But the games do not reward emotional connections, they exploit them. The Capitol knows that audiences become more invested when tributes have relationships. It makes the eventual losses more dramatic, and drama is exactly what the Capitol wants. Haymitch begins to understand that even the moments of friendship inside the arena can be transformed into entertainment. That realization makes him increasingly angry. The people watching from the Capitol are not necessarily seeing the real Haymitch. They are seeing whatever story the broadcast creates. If he is presented as an underdog, the audience may support him. If he is presented as dangerous, they may turn against him. If he becomes emotionally connected to another tribute, the Capitol can use that relationship to make the story more dramatic. The tributes are fighting for their lives, but the Capitol is fighting for ratings. That difference is almost impossible to accept. Haymitch's response is not to become louder. It is to become harder to manipulate. He starts making decisions that are useful to him rather than decisions that would make the best television. Sometimes that means avoiding a fight. Sometimes it means allowing another tribute to believe they have the advantage. And sometimes it means waiting until the arena itself creates an opportunity. This approach requires an unusual amount of self-control. Every instinct tells Haymitch to react when danger appears. Instead, he learns to wait. That waiting becomes one of the skills that will define him years later. The older Haymitch may appear lazy or careless, but underneath that behavior is someone who understands timing better than most people around him. He knows that acting too quickly can be as dangerous as acting too slowly. The 50th Hunger Games are where he learns that lesson. As the remaining tributes move through the arena, the number of possible outcomes begins shrinking. There are fewer people, fewer alliances, fewer surprises. Eventually, everyone will have to confront one another. Haymitch knows this. He also knows that the Capitol is building toward a final moment. The game makers want an ending that feels satisfying to the audience. They want the remaining tributes to collide in a way that creates suspense and excitement. That means Haymitch can potentially use their expectations against them. If the Capitol expects a particular kind of ending, then Haymitch can think about what they will do to create it. This is the beginning of a much bigger realization. The game makers may control the environment, but they also have to follow the logic of their own show. They cannot simply do anything at any moment without considering the audience. The games have rules. The broadcast has expectations, and the Capitol has an image of itself that it wants to protect. Haymitch begins understanding that these limitations are weaknesses. The people running the games believe they are demonstrating absolute power. But absolute power is difficult to maintain once people start recognizing its patterns. That is what makes Haymitch's intelligence so dangerous. He is not stronger than the Capitol. He is not more powerful. He simply sees something the Capitol assumes nobody will notice. The system is predictable. And if the system is predictable, it can be challenged. The emotional cost of this realization is heavy. Haymitch is beginning to understand that the Capitol's greatest weapon is not the arena. It is the belief that the Capitol cannot be defeated. Once that belief is weakened, even slightly, the entire system becomes less intimidating. But Haymitch does not yet know whether his own actions can create that kind of change. He is not thinking about rebellion in the way later generations will. He is thinking about getting home. That distinction is important because Haymitch's motivation remains personal. He wants to live. He wants to see District 12 again. He wants to see the people he loves. He wants the games to end. The idea that his survival might mean something larger comes later. Right now, he is simply a young man trying to find a way out. And that makes his situation even more heartbreaking. He has no idea that his story will eventually become part of the history of Panem. He does not know that years later, Another girl from District 12 will enter the same arena system. He does not know that the lessons he is learning now will eventually help him prepare to teenagers for their own games. He only knows what is happening in front of him. And what is happening in front of him is becoming increasingly dangerous. The arena's cycle continues. The threats appear and disappear according to the clock. Every movement has to be timed. Every decision has to account for what comes next. Haymitch becomes increasingly confident that the arena's design contains a weakness. But there is still one major problem. He needs the right opportunity. Knowing how the arena works does not automatically tell him how to defeat it. He needs a moment when the pattern, the environment, and the position of the remaining tributes all come together. That moment cannot be forced. If he tries too early, he could die. If he waits too long, the opportunity could disappear. This is the point where Haymitch's entire journey begins coming together. The boy who once entered the arena without understanding what was waiting for him has now learned how the games function. He has learned how the capital manipulates people. He has learned how alliances work. He has learned how fear changes decisions. He has learned how the audience influences the games. And he has learned that the arena itself has rules that can potentially be turned against its creators. But learning all of that has come at a cost. He has lost people. He has been forced to make choices he never wanted to make. And he has started becoming someone who thinks about survival before almost anything else. That transformation is already visible. The innocent teenager from District 12 is disappearing. In his place is someone sharper, more suspicious, and more difficult to control. The capital may eventually call him a victor, but the audience will understand that the word means something very different to Haymitch. A victor is supposed to represent triumph. Haymitch will represent survival, and those are not the same thing. As the final stages approach, Haymitch knows there will soon be no more time for hesitation. The remaining tributes will be forced into the last confrontation. The clock will continue turning, the arena will continue operating, and the capital will be waiting for its perfect ending. But Haymitch is no longer interested in giving them the ending they expect. He has spent the entire games learning how their system works. Now he is preparing to make the one move that could change everything. He does not know whether it will succeed. He does not know what the consequences will be, but he knows one thing. If he is going to survive the 50th Hunger Games, he cannot simply be the person the capital wants him to be. He has to become something the capital never expected. And that is where the final chapter of his journey truly begins. The final stage of the 50th Hunger Games is where everything Haymitch has learned begins to matter. He has spent the games observing the arena, studying the people around him, and understanding the patterns hidden inside the capital's carefully designed spectacle. Now there is almost no room left for mistakes. The number of surviving tributes has fallen, and with every loss the pressure becomes heavier. There are no longer enough people for the arena to feel like a vast world. The remaining contestants are becoming impossible to avoid. Sooner or later, their paths will cross. Haymitch knows that the capital wants exactly that. The game makers need a final confrontation that will keep the audience watching until the very end. They want tension, danger, and a clear winner. They want the final moments to become another piece of capital entertainment that people will remember. But Haymitch has started looking at the situation differently. He understands that the game makers have expectations, and expectations can be used. Instead of thinking only about what another tribute might do, Haymitch has to think about what the capital wants everyone to believe will happen next. If he can predict the expectations of the people controlling the arena, he may be able to predict the choices they make. That is an enormous risk. The capital has much more power than Haymitch does. If the game makers realize exactly what he is trying to accomplish, they can change the situation. They can introduce another danger, alter the conditions, or force the remaining tributes into a different position. Haymitch therefore has to move carefully. He cannot allow the capital to understand his entire plan. At the same time, the emotional pressure is becoming harder to ignore. The people who entered the arena with him are no longer all there. Every empty space around him represents someone who has been lost. For Haymitch, those losses are not numbers. They are faces. Voices. Memories. The capital can present each death as another moment in a televised competition, but Haymitch experiences every loss personally. That difference is beginning to separate him emotionally from the world around him. He knows the audience may be cheering. He knows people in the capital may be discussing which tribute they want to win, but he cannot see the games that way anymore. To him, the arena is no longer entertainment. It is a place that has taken people away from him. and the person he was before entering it is disappearing with them. This is especially painful when he thinks about the people waiting back in District 12. The idea of returning home still gives him strength, but it also creates fear. What will happen when he returns? Will he be able to live normally? Will the people waiting for him understand what he has experienced? Haymitch has no answers. All he knows is that he has to make it out first. That simple goal keeps him moving. As the final survivors are brought closer together, Haymitch's earlier observations about the arena become increasingly useful. He has learned that the dangers are not random. The clock governs the arena, and each section has its own threat. That knowledge gives him something close to an advantage. But an advantage is not the same as safety. The arena remains deadly. One wrong step can still end everything. One mistake can turn a carefully planned escape into a trap. One moment of hesitation can give another tribute the opportunity they need. Haymitch therefore becomes more dependent on timing than ever before. He has to know when to move, when to wait. When to disappear, and when to take the risk. That ability to judge timing becomes one of the defining characteristics of his survival. The capital expects the remaining tributes to become increasingly desperate. Haymitch does become desperate, but desperation does not completely destroy his ability to think. Instead, it makes him more determined to find a solution. He begins putting together everything he has learned since the reaping. The arena has rules. The game makers have expectations. The remaining tributes have weaknesses. The capital audience has its own idea of how the story should end. All of these pieces are connected. If Haymitch can find the right point where they overlap, he may be able to create an opening. The challenge is that he cannot do it alone. Even the smartest person in the arena still needs other people at certain moments. This brings Haymitch back to the importance of trust. He has learned to be suspicious, but he has not completely abandoned the idea of loyalty. That is what makes his relationship with Maiseli so important. Their time together has shown him that the games have not completely erased human connection. For a while, they can still treat each other as people instead of competitors, but the arena has a cruel way of testing relationships. There is no guarantee that two people who care about each other can both survive. The closer the games move toward the end, the more obvious that becomes. Haymitch has to face a possibility that he does not want to accept. Survival may eventually require him to lose someone he cares about. Knowing that does not make the moment easier. In fact, it makes it worse. Because now every moment of trust carries the knowledge that it may not last. This is the kind of emotional damage that stays with a person. It teaches Haymitch to protect himself by creating distance. And years later, that distance will become one of the most recognizable parts of his personality. The older Haymitch often seems like someone who has stopped expecting good things from people. But the younger Haymitch is still learning why expecting good things can hurt. The games are teaching him that lesson one loss at a time. Outside the arena, the capital continues turning the remaining tributes into entertainment. Their images are shown to millions of people. Their actions are discussed. Their personalities become part of a public narrative. Haymitch's story is becoming especially interesting because he has survived longer than many people expected. The underdog from District 12 is still standing. That makes him valuable to the capital audience. But it also makes him dangerous. A tribute who becomes popular can gain resources. At the same time, a tribute who becomes too popular can become an obstacle that other contestants want to remove. Haymitch has to balance both sides. He cannot completely disappear, but he cannot allow himself to become predictable. This is where the difference between Haymitch and many of the other tributes becomes clear. Some people rely on strength, some rely on alliances, some rely on fear. Haymitch relies on understanding. He studies the people around him and tries to predict what they will do before they do it. He studies the arena and tries to predict what danger will come next. And he studies the capital itself, trying to predict what the people controlling the games will want. 3 different battles are happening at the same time. The physical battle inside the arena. The psychological battle between the tributes, and the invisible battle between Haymitch and the system controlling everything. That third battle is the one that will eventually define him. Haymitch may not be able to defeat the capital during these games, but he can prove something important. The capital's control is not perfect, its system has weaknesses, its rules can be understood, and its own confidence can sometimes become a vulnerability. For a government that depends on fear, even the smallest crack in that fear can become dangerous. Haymitch does not yet understand how important that realization will become in the future. Right now, he only sees an opportunity to survive. The clock continues moving. The arena continues changing. The remaining tributes continue fighting, and Haymitch moves closer to the decision that will define his victory. There will be no easy escape. There will be no perfect ending. If he wants to leave the arena alive, he will have to accept that surviving may mean carrying consequences he cannot escape afterward. That is the hidden tragedy of the 50th Hunger Games. The Capitol may eventually announce Haymitch as the winner, but the audience will only see the final moment. They will not see everything that happened before it. They will not understand every choice. They will not know how many times he wanted to give up. And they will not know what parts of himself he had to sacrifice simply to reach the end. Haymitch is approaching the moment that will turn him from a tribute into a victor. But before he can receive that title, he has one final problem to solve. The arena has shown him its pattern. Now he has to decide exactly how to use it. And if his idea works, the 50th Hunger Games will end in a way the Capitol never intended. Haymitch has reached the point where there is almost no room left for another mistake. The arena has revealed enough of its design for him to understand that the dangers are connected, and the remaining tributes are running out of places where they can avoid one another. Everything is moving toward the same conclusion. For Haymitch, the most important thing now is timing. He cannot simply wait forever. Eventually, the Capitol will force the remaining tributes into a final confrontation, and when that happens, his knowledge of the arena may no longer be enough to protect him. He needs to act while he still has an opportunity. The idea forming in his mind is dangerous because it depends on the arena behaving exactly as he expects. If one part of the pattern changes, his entire plan could fail. There is no way to test it safely. The only way to know whether it will work is to take the risk. That is the difference between knowing something and being brave enough to use it. Haymitch has spent much of the games reacting to danger. Now he is preparing to create a situation of his own. The decision is not easy because he understands what failure would mean. There would be no second attempt. No way to explain himself. No opportunity to start again. The Capitol would simply move on to another tribute and another story. But Haymitch has reached a point where continuing to play exactly by the Capitol's expectations feels almost as dangerous as taking the risk. He knows what the Capitol wants. It wants a clean ending, a victor, a celebration. A story that makes the Hunger Games look powerful and successful. Haymitch is beginning to see that the best way to survive may be to give the Capitol the ending it wants while making sure the truth behind that ending belongs to him. That distinction is subtle, but it becomes important. The Capitol can announce the winner. It can control the cameras. It can decide how the story is presented. But it cannot completely control what actually happened inside the arena. Haymitch's goal is to make that difference matter. As he moves through the arena, every detail he has noticed becomes part of his thinking. The clock, the changing dangers, the position of the remaining tributes, and the expectations of the game makers all have to fit together. One mistake could put him directly in the path of a deadly threat. One wrong assumption could expose his plan. One moment of hesitation could give another tribute the advantage. Yet Haymitch continues. His determination is no longer based only on hope. It is based on everything he has learned. That makes his confidence different from the confidence he had before the games. He is not confident because he believes he is stronger than everyone else. He is confident because he finally understands the environment around him. The Capitol has spent years building the Hunger Games into a system that appears impossible to challenge. Haymitch has discovered that even a powerful system can have weaknesses. The remaining tributes do not necessarily understand what he has figured out. Some are focused on their immediate survival, while others are thinking about the people they have lost and the possibility of becoming the final victor. Haymitch is thinking about something bigger. He is thinking about the structure of the arena itself, and that makes his next decision one of the most important moments of his entire life. There is also the emotional weight of knowing that the people closest to him may not make it out. Haymitch's relationship with Maisali has already changed him. Their connection proves that even inside the Hunger Games, where the Capitol expects everyone to become selfish, people can still care about one another. But caring does not guarantee survival. That is a lesson Haymitch is about to learn in the most painful way. The arena does not care about friendship. The Capitol does not care about love. The games only care about the final survivor. That is why Haymitch's memories of home become so important. The people he loves represent something the Capitol cannot manufacture. They remind him that there is a world outside the games where people are more than entertainment. He wants to return to that world. He wants to believe that if he survives, he can somehow put everything behind him. But the audience already knows that this will not happen. The victory will follow him. The memories will follow him. The people he loses will follow him. Even the capital will continue to follow him. Winning will not mean freedom. It will mean becoming part of the capital's system in a different way. A victor is no longer an ordinary citizen. A victor becomes a symbol. Haymitch will eventually understand that being a victor means carrying the games with him wherever he goes. That knowledge gives the final stages of the competition an additional layer of tragedy. He is fighting desperately to escape an arena that will never completely leave him. Still, he cannot think about the future too much. The present demands his attention. The arena's pattern continues. The clock continues moving. The danger approaches. And Haymitch prepares to make his move. His strategy depends on the idea that the arena itself can become a weapon. If the capital has created the dangers according to a predictable system, then the system can potentially be manipulated. Haymitch does not need to control the arena. He only needs to understand it well enough to place himself where the danger can work in his favor. It is an incredibly risky idea. But it is also exactly the kind of thinking that will later make him such an effective mentor. Haymitch understands something that many people do not. Sometimes the best way to defeat an opponent is not to become stronger than them. It is to make their own strength work against them. The capital believes the arena gives it absolute power. Haymitch begins turning that belief into a weakness. The remaining tributes are moving toward the final confrontation, and the tension reaches a point where everyone understands that the end is close. There is no longer any illusion that the games can continue forever. Soon, there will be one victor. The question is who. For Haymitch, the answer will depend on whether his plan succeeds. For the capital, the answer is supposed to be determined by the rules. But Haymitch has spent the entire games learning how those rules work. And now he is prepared to test them. What makes this moment especially important is that Haymitch is not simply trying to defeat another tribute. He is challenging the assumptions behind the games themselves. The capital believes the tributes are powerless. Haymitch has discovered that power can sometimes come from understanding. The capital believes fear will force people to behave predictably. Haymitch has learned how to think through fear. The capital believes the arena belongs to the game makers. Haymitch has realized that even the game makers are limited by the system they created. That realization gives him his final advantage. But it also puts him in greater danger than ever before. If the capital recognizes what he is doing, the entire situation can change. The game makers can alter the conditions. They can create another threat. They can remove the opportunity he is waiting for. Haymitch therefore has to act before they understand him. This is the moment when all his observations, all his losses and all his experiences inside the arena come together. The boy who entered the games without knowing what was waiting for him has become someone capable of looking directly at the capital's greatest weapon and searching for a weakness. He is still afraid. He is still exhausted. He is still carrying the emotional weight of everyone who has been lost. But he is no longer helpless. And that is perhaps the most important transformation of all. Haymitch is beginning to understand that survival does not always come from overpowering the person standing in front of you. Sometimes survival comes from seeing what they cannot see. The arena continues its cycle. The final moments are approaching, and Haymitch is ready to take the risk he has been preparing for. Whatever happens next will determine not only who wins the 50th Hunger Games, but also the kind of man Haymitch Abernathy will become for the rest of his life. Because once the final decision is made, there will be no going back to the person he was before the reaping. The capital may call him a victor, but Haymitch will know exactly what that victory cost. By now, Haymitch has reached the point where survival is no longer something he can take for granted. The arena has become smaller, the dangers more familiar and the remaining tributes more desperate. Every person still alive knows that the end is coming, even if nobody knows exactly what that final moment will look like. For Haymitch, the greatest advantage he has is the knowledge he has collected throughout the games. He has learned the rhythm of the arena and understood that its structure is connected to the clock. The dangers are not random. They arrive according to a pattern, and that pattern has allowed him to survive longer than many of the tributes around him. But there is another discovery that becomes even more important. The arena has a boundary. It is not an ordinary boundary, and it is not something the tributes can simply walk through. The capital has designed the arena to keep everyone trapped inside, and the force protecting that boundary is invisible unless someone knows what to look for. For most tributes, The boundary is simply another limit. For Haymitch, it becomes a potential weapon. That is the difference between the way he thinks and the way the Capitol expects him to think. The game makers created the arena to control the tributes, but Haymitch begins asking whether the same technology used to control them can be turned against the people inside the arena. He does not have the equipment or power to destroy the system, but he does not need to destroy it. He only needs to understand it. This becomes especially important when the final survivors begin moving toward one another. The games have reached the stage where hiding is no longer a reliable strategy. The Capitol wants the remaining tributes in one place, and the arena itself is designed to make that happen. Haymitch knows that the final confrontation is coming. He also knows that fighting directly could put him at a disadvantage. The other tributes may be stronger, they may have better weapons, they may have more confidence, but Haymitch has something they do not have. He has spent the entire games studying the arena. And now he is prepared to use everything he has learned before he can reach that final moment. However, he has to deal with one of the most painful losses of his entire journey. Maisily has become more than an ally to him. She represents someone from his own district and someone who understands what it means to be trapped in the Capitol's system. Their relationship gives Haymitch a rare sense of companionship in an environment designed to isolate everyone. But the Hunger Games do not allow that connection to last forever. Maisily is eventually killed in the arena, leaving Haymitch to confront one of the hardest truths of the games. Caring about someone does not mean you can save them. Her death is devastating precisely because Haymitch has already begun imagining a future beyond the arena. For a moment, the possibility of returning home with someone who understands what he has been through makes survival feel less lonely. That possibility disappears. Haymitch is left carrying another memory. And that loss changes the way he approaches the final part of the games. He has less to lose in the immediate sense, but he also has more reason to survive. He wants the suffering to end. He wants to leave the arena. And he wants the Capitol to stop deciding what happens to him. The final confrontation becomes a battle between Haymitch's understanding of the arena and the physical strength of the remaining tribute. Haymitch knows he cannot win by simply overpowering his opponent. So he relies on the environment. The invisible force field surrounding the arena becomes central to his strategy. The Capitol created it as a barrier. Haymitch sees it as an opportunity. The final move requires extraordinary timing. If he gets it wrong, the plan could fail immediately. There is no room for hesitation because the person attacking him is not going to give him unlimited chances. Haymitch waits for the right moment. Then he uses the arena's own force against his opponent. The result is devastating. The weapon is sent back with tremendous force, and the final confrontation ends in a way that Haymitch could never have achieved through strength alone. He has won. The 50th Hunger Games are over. Haymitch Abernathy is the victor. For the Capitol audience, this should be the perfect ending. A tribute from District 12 has survived one of the most brutal Hunger Games in history. The cameras have their winner. The Capitol has its champion. The games have produced another story of survival that can be packaged and celebrated. But Haymitch does not experience the moment as a celebration. He has lost people he cared about. He has seen things no teenager should ever have to see. And he knows that the person who entered the arena is gone. The Capitol can give him a crown. It cannot give him back what he lost. That is the difference between what the audience sees and what Haymitch experiences. To them, he is victorious. To himself, he is simply alive. And then the consequences become even worse. The Capitol does not appreciate the way Haymitch won. His final move exposes a weakness in the arena itself. He did not defeat the games in the way the game makers intended. He studied their system and used one of its own mechanisms against another tribute. That creates an uncomfortable problem for the Capitol. The Hunger Games are supposed to demonstrate absolute control. Haymitch's victory demonstrates that the system can be understood, and anything that can be understood can potentially be challenged. The Capitol cannot allow that message to become powerful. So Haymitch's victory does not lead to the freedom he imagined. Instead, his life becomes connected to the Capitol in a new and disturbing way. He is now a victor. That means he belongs to a very small group of people who have survived the games. But it also means the Capitol can use him as part of its spectacle. His story can be celebrated. His image can be controlled. His future can be shaped. The victory tour and the attention that follows are not simply rewards. They become another reminder that the capital owns the narrative. Haymitch has survived the arena, but the capital still has power over what happens after it. This is where his transformation becomes complete. The young man who entered the games believing that survival would allow him to return to his old life begins to understand that there is no simple return. The arena has changed him, the capital has changed him, and the people he lost have changed him. The experience will eventually explain why the older Haymitch is so emotionally guarded. It explains why he drinks. It explains why he often appears uninterested in the world around him. It explains why he understands the Hunger Games better than almost anyone. He has already lived through the worst version of them. And he knows that the capital does not simply forget. The victory also changes the way Haymitch sees power. Before the games, the capital may have seemed like an enormous force that could never be challenged. After surviving the arena, Haymitch knows something different. He knows the capital is powerful, but he also knows it is not perfect. He has seen a weakness in its system. He has seen what happens when people refuse to behave exactly as expected, and he knows that the people controlling Panem can be afraid of losing control. That knowledge will remain with him years later. When another tribute from District 12 is selected, Haymitch will be able to recognize the same patterns immediately. He will know what the capital wants. He will know what the audience expects. He will know how sponsors work. And he will know that the real danger does not always come from the person holding the weapon. Sometimes it comes from the people watching. That is what makes Haymitch's victory so important. To the larger Hunger Games story, he does not simply become another victor. He becomes someone who understands the machine. And once you understand the machine that controls you, you can never look at it in quite the same way again. The tragedy is that understanding the capital does not give Haymitch the power to escape it. Instead, it gives him a lifetime of knowledge that he has to carry. The 50th Hunger Games end with Haymitch alive, but his story does not end there. In many ways, the real punishment begins. After the arena, the capital has to decide what to do with a victor who has demonstrated that its perfect system has weaknesses. Haymitch has to return to District 12 and face a life that no longer feels like the life he left behind. And somewhere between the celebration of his victory and the reality waiting for him at home, the final piece of the young Haymitch begins disappearing. The boy who entered the arena wanted to survive. The victor who leaves it has learned something much darker. Survival can be a victory in the arena. But outside the arena, survival may become a burden. And Haymitch Abernathy is about to discover exactly how heavy that burden can be. Winning the 50th Hunger Games should have been the moment when Haymitch finally escaped the nightmare. Instead, it becomes the beginning of a different kind of imprisonment. The arena is gone, but the capital is still there. Haymitch returns to District 12 as a victor, and on the surface, that should make him one of the luckiest people in Panem. He has survived an event where dozens of young people were sent to their deaths. He has earned the title of champion, and the capital can now use his story as another example of the supposed glory of the Hunger Games. But Haymitch knows better. He has seen what happens behind the cameras. He has seen how quickly friendships can become tragedies. He has seen people forced to kill each other simply because the capital demanded it. And he has discovered that the system everyone fears is not as perfect as it wants people to believe. That knowledge changes everything. When Haymitch returns home, the people around him can see that he has survived, but survival is not the same as returning to normal. The person who left District 12 before the reaping is no longer there. The games have changed the way Haymitch looks at people, relationships, and authority. He has learned that anything he says can be used against him. He has learned that the capital is always watching, and he has learned that even victory can be turned into another form of control. The capital does not simply let victors disappear. Victors become public figures. Their stories are used to entertain the population. Their victories become part of the capital's propaganda, and their continued existence reminds every district that the games can produce survivors. Haymitch is now part of that system. He may hate it, but he cannot simply walk away from it. That creates an impossible situation. He has survived the capital's arena only to discover that the capital still has a place for him, and that place is not necessarily comfortable. His victory also creates tension because of the way he won. The final move that defeated the last tribute was not simply a display of strength. It exposed a weakness in the arena itself. Haymitch had recognized how the force field worked and used it against his opponent, for the capital. That is embarrassing. The games are supposed to demonstrate the absolute power of the capital. A tribute who finds a weakness in the arena creates a problem. If people begin thinking about that weakness, they may begin questioning the entire system. The capital therefore has an interest in controlling Haymitch's image. They can celebrate him as a victor. They can present his story as entertainment, but they do not want people focusing too closely on how he actually won. This becomes one of the first major lessons Haymitch learns after returning home. The capital does not need to tell you that you are being controlled. It simply creates the circumstances where every choice has consequences. That lesson will remain with him for years. The emotional damage is just as significant. Haymitch has lost people he cared about, including Maisily. Her death becomes one of the memories that he cannot easily escape. She was not simply another tribute in the arena. She was someone from home, someone who understood his world and someone who had become part of his struggle to survive. Losing her means that victory comes with guilt. Haymitch survived. She did not. There is no way to make that fact feel fair. The capital may call him the winner, but Haymitch knows that the word winner does not describe what happened to the people who died. They were not losers. They were victims of a system that forced them into the arena. That understanding separates Haymitch from the capital's version of the story. The capital wants a competition. Haymitch sees a crime. And that difference becomes increasingly important as he grows older. The people of District 12 may welcome their victor, but Haymitch cannot simply forget what happened. Every celebration connected to the games can remind him of the people who did not return. Every capital broadcast can bring back memories. Every future reaping can remind him that other families will eventually experience the same fear. This is where his role as a mentor becomes important. Years later, Haymitch will be responsible for helping tributes from District 12 survive the same system that destroyed his own life. That role is cruelly ironic. He will have to teach young people how to play a game he despises. He will have to help them gain sponsors. He will have to explain how the audience thinks. He will have to teach them how to survive the arena. And every time he does, he will be forced to remember what happened to him. The 50th Hunger Games, therefore, do not simply explain Haymitch's past. They explain his future. His behavior as a mentor becomes easier to understand when we know what he has already experienced. When he tells a tribute to be careful, he is not speaking theoretically. He knows exactly what the arena can do. When he warns someone not to trust the capital, he is speaking from personal experience. When he appears frustrated with tributes who do not listen, part of that frustration comes from knowing that he has already watched too many young people die. And when he seems emotionally distant, that distance is not necessarily because he does not care. It may be because he cares too much. The tragedy of Haymitch is that the capital has taken one of his greatest strengths and turned it into a burden. He understands people. He understands the games. He understands the capital. But understanding those things does not make him happy. It makes him aware. And awareness can be painful. The more he understands, the harder it becomes to pretend that everything is normal. This also explains why Haymitch eventually becomes so cynical. He has seen how the capital can turn tragedy into entertainment. He has seen how quickly people can become forgotten. He has seen how victors are celebrated while the dead are left behind. And he knows that another games will eventually happen. There will be another reaping. Another group of children. Another arena. Another victor. The cycle will continue. That realization is perhaps more painful than the games themselves. Because inside the arena, Haymitch could at least believe there was an ending. After he wins, he discovers that there is no real ending. The Hunger Games continue, the capital continues, and the districts remain trapped. Haymitch has escaped one arena, only to live in a society that is still built around the same violence. This is why his victory cannot be treated as a traditional happy ending. He survives, but the system survives too. The capital gets its victor. The districts get another reminder of what happens when they are forced to participate. And Haymitch gets a lifetime of memories. His relationship with Lenore Dove also becomes part of this emotional landscape. Before the games, she represented the possibility of a future beyond District 12's hardships. She gave Haymitch another reason to Imagine a life outside the control of the capital. That future becomes more complicated after his victory. The person who returns home has experienced something that is almost impossible to explain to someone who has not been inside the arena. Haymitch may be alive, but he is carrying a world of memories that cannot simply be left behind. That emotional distance becomes part of the tragedy of his character. He has survived something designed to destroy him, but surviving has changed the way he connects with the people he loves. The capital has taught him that happiness can be used against him, trust can be used against him, love can be used against him. And that makes emotional connection frightening. The older Haymitch will eventually build walls around himself, but those walls did not appear overnight. They began here. They began in the arena. They grew with every loss, and they became stronger after his victory. That is why the 50th Hunger Games are so important to understanding the character. Without this story, Haymitch can seem like a bitter mentor who has simply given up. With this story, his behavior becomes much more complicated. He has not simply given up. He has survived. And sometimes survival leaves a person carrying wounds that nobody else can see. The capital may celebrate Haymitch as proof that the Hunger Games create heroes, but Haymitch's experience proves something completely different. The games do not create heroes, they create survivors. And sometimes the strongest survivors are the people who remember exactly what the system tried to take from them. Haymitch leaves the arena alive, but the arena never completely leaves Haymitch. That is the true legacy of his victory. Leaves Haymitch. That is the true legacy of his victory. Haymitch's story does not truly end when he walks out of the arena. In some ways, that is where the most difficult part begins. Inside the games, every decision has an immediate purpose. Find food, avoid danger, protect yourself. Stay alive until the next day. Once the arena disappears behind him, those simple goals are replaced by something much harder, living with everything that happened. That is what makes the 50th Hunger Games different from an ordinary origin story. We already know the man Haymitch becomes. We know the sarcasm. We know the drinking. We know the distance he keeps between himself and other people. We know that when he eventually becomes a mentor, he understands the games almost instinctively. But now there is a reason behind all of it. The younger Haymitch was not born broken. The capital broke the world around him and then expected him to continue living inside it. His victory gives him a place in history, but it does not give him peace. That contradiction is at the heart of his character. The capital can celebrate a victor because a victor makes the Hunger Games look successful. The story they want people to remember is simple. The games are dangerous, but someone strong enough can survive them. Haymitch knows that is a lie. He knows that survival depends on circumstances, luck, intelligence, alliances, and countless decisions that can change in a second. He knows that the people who died were not simply weaker than him. Some were brave, some were clever, some were loyal, some simply made one wrong decision at the wrong moment. The capital turns all of that complexity into a show. Haymitch can never completely accept that, and that becomes one of the reasons his relationship with the capital remains complicated for the rest of his life. He understands how the system works because he has been inside it. He understands what sponsors want. He understands how audiences react. He understands why certain tributes become popular while others disappear from public attention. Most importantly, he understands that the games are not only about killing, they are about controlling the story. The capital controls the story before the games even begin. It controls how the tributes are introduced. It controls what the audience sees. It controls the interviews. It controls the broadcasts. And after the games, it controls how the victory is remembered. Haymitch's greatest weapon has always been his ability to recognize what is happening behind that story. That ability will eventually make him invaluable to people who need someone who understands the system from the inside. But it also makes his life more difficult. Because once you know how propaganda works, it becomes almost impossible to watch it innocently. Haymitch has seen the truth behind the performance. He knows that every smiling camera can hide something terrible. He knows that every celebration can exist alongside grief. And he knows that the capital can turn a person's worst moment into entertainment for millions. That knowledge stays with him. It also changes the way he views the idea of being a hero. Haymitch does not think of himself as one. He survived. That is all. He did not enter the arena trying to become a symbol. He did not ask to represent District 12. He did not ask to become famous. He certainly did not ask to carry the memories of everyone who died. Yet the Capitol gives him all of those things anyway. This is one of the cruelest aspects of becoming a victor. The games end for the audience. They do not necessarily end for the victor. The cameras stop. The crowds move on. Another story eventually takes their attention, but the person who survived remembers everything. Haymitch is therefore left with a strange kind of loneliness. Millions of people know his name, but very few people understand him. They know the victor. They do not know the boy who entered the arena. They know the final result. They do not know what it cost. They know that he survived. They do not know what he lost. That gap between public image and private reality becomes one of the defining elements of his future. It also explains why Haymitch becomes so good at hiding what he really thinks. He has learned that showing too much can be dangerous. The Capitol watches people who challenge its narrative. So Haymitch learns to disguise himself. Sometimes sarcasm becomes a shield. Sometimes indifference becomes a shield. Sometimes alcohol becomes a way to escape memories he cannot otherwise silence. None of these things erase what happened. They simply make it easier for him to live with it. And that is what makes his later relationship with Katniss and Peeta so meaningful. When they enter the games, Haymitch recognizes something familiar in them. He sees young people who have been pulled into a system they did not choose. He sees their fear. He sees their potential. And he sees the same capital machinery beginning to close around them. That is why he understands things they initially cannot. Katniss may think the biggest danger is another tribute. Haymitch knows better. Peeta may believe that staying kind is enough. Haymitch knows kindness can become a weapon in the Capitol's hands. The audience may think the games are about finding the strongest survivor. Haymitch knows they are also about creating a story. That knowledge becomes his greatest contribution. He can teach them how to survive the arena, but he can also teach them how to survive the cameras. And sometimes the second skill is even more important, because once a tribute becomes part of the Capitol's story, every emotion can be turned into a weapon. Love can become entertainment. Friendship can become manipulation. Anger can become propaganda. Even rebellion can be turned into a spectacle if the Capitol controls the narrative. Haymitch has learned that lesson decades earlier. The 50th Hunger Games therefore become the foundation for everything he eventually teaches. His experience with Macaulay teaches him the cost of trust. His experience with the arena teaches him to look for patterns. His experience with the Capitol teaches him to question appearances. His victory teaches him that winning does not necessarily mean freedom. And his losses teach him that surviving alone is not enough. These lessons remain hidden beneath the personality people see later. That is why understanding the young Haymitch changes the way we see the older one. He was not simply a man who became bitter. He was a teenager who was forced to grow up in the most brutal way possible. The Capitol took away the luxury of innocence. And once innocence is gone, it is almost impossible to get it back. The most tragic part is that Haymitch eventually has to watch other young people experience the same system. Every reaping becomes a reminder. Every games brings back memories. Every new tribute carries the possibility of another loss. He cannot stop the system, but he can try to help the people caught inside it. That becomes his purpose, even if he does not always express it in a healthy way. He may shout. He may insult people. He may appear careless. He may act as though he does not care what happens. But underneath all of that is someone who knows exactly how quickly a tribute can die. He knows because he has watched it happen. He knows because he has survived it. And he knows because he carries those memories every day. That is ultimately what makes Haymitch's story so important to the larger Hunger Games universe. His story is not simply about how a young man won the 50th Hunger Games. It is about how the Capitol created the person who would later help challenge its system. The Capitol wanted a victor. It created a witness. It wanted a symbol of its power. It created someone who understood its weaknesses. It wanted Haymitch to prove that the Hunger Games could turn suffering into glory. Instead, his life shows the audience what that glory really costs. And that is why the title of victor becomes almost meaningless when we look at Haymitch's life as a whole. He won the arena. But he lost people he loved. He gained fame, but he lost privacy. He gained survival, but he lost the simple future he once imagined. He became a symbol, but he could never forget that he was once just a boy from District 12. The 50th Hunger Games may have ended with Haymitch standing as the final survivor, but the consequences of that victory continue far beyond the arena. They shape the man he becomes. They shape the mentor he becomes. And eventually, They shape the role he plays when Panem reaches its own breaking point. That is the real significance of Haymitch's story. It does not simply explain his past. It explains why he matters. Because sometimes the person who survives the system is the person who understands it well enough to help someone else fight back. And Haymitch Abernathy will spend the rest of his life carrying that knowledge. The Capitol may have wanted his victory to become another piece of entertainment. Instead, it became the beginning of a story that would eventually reach far beyond the 50th Hunger Games, a story about survival, a story about loss. And eventually, a story about what happens when people who have been controlled for generations finally realize that the system controlling them is not invincible. What makes Haymitch's story even more important is the fact that his victory does not happen in isolation. The 50th Hunger Games become one of those moments in Panem's history where the Capitol believes it has demonstrated its strength, while the reality underneath the spectacle tells a very different story. Haymitch has seen that reality from inside. He has learned that the Capitol depends on people believing that its power is absolute. If everyone accepts that the rules cannot be challenged, then the system becomes almost impossible to resist. But if even one person discovers that those rules have limits, the illusion begins to weaken. Haymitch's victory gives him that knowledge. He knows the Capitol's technology can fail. He knows the game makers can make mistakes. He knows the people running the games have expectations that can be predicted. And he knows that the tributes are not simply powerless pieces on a board. That knowledge becomes part of his identity. Years later, when he watches the games from outside the arena, he does not watch them like an ordinary citizen. He sees the manipulation behind every scene. He notices when the game makers are trying to create a particular emotional moment. He understands why the cameras focus on certain tributes. He recognizes when the Capitol wants the audience to feel sympathy, fear, or excitement. To someone else, the broadcast may look like entertainment. To Haymitch, it looks like a machine, and he knows exactly how that machine works. That is why his role as a mentor is so complicated. A mentor is supposed to help tributes survive, but Haymitch also has to prepare them for the psychological side of the games. He has to teach them that survival is not only about weapons or food. It is about perception. The audience has to care about you. Sponsors have to believe you are worth supporting. The Capitol has to see you as interesting enough to keep watching. And yet, becoming too interesting can create another problem. The more popular a tribute becomes, the more valuable they become to the Capitol's story. That means they can also become a bigger target. Haymitch understands this balance because he experienced it himself. He knows what it feels like to have strangers decide what kind of person you are based on a few moments shown on television. He knows that the public never sees the entire truth, and he knows that the Capitol can change that truth whenever it wants. This becomes particularly relevant when Katniss and Peeta eventually enter the arena. Their story creates something Haymitch has never seen in exactly the same way before. The Capitol becomes fascinated by their relationship. The audience becomes emotionally invested. And suddenly the games are no longer just about who will survive. They are about what their relationship means. Haymitch understands immediately that this can become both an advantage and a trap. The Capitol wants a romance. The audience wants a story. Haymitch wants two young people to stay alive. Those three goals are not necessarily the same. His experience from the 50th Hunger Games allows him to understand the difference. He knows that the Capitol will happily celebrate a relationship as long as it remains useful to the spectacle. But he also knows that genuine human connection can become something much more powerful than the Capitol expects. That is one of the reasons Haymitch's past matters so much. He has already seen the Capitol try to control relationships inside the arena. He has already seen people become attached to one another and then lose each other. He knows exactly what emotional manipulation can do. So when he sees Katniss and Peeta creating a story that the Capitol did not completely design, he recognizes the danger. He also recognizes the opportunity. This is where the young Haymitch's experience becomes connected to the future of Panem. His victory taught him that the Capitol's greatest weakness is not its weapons. It is its need to control the story. As long as the Capitol controls what people believe, it can maintain its authority. But if people begin creating their own meaning, the Capitol has a problem. Haymitch understands this before many others do. He understands that the audience can become emotionally attached to something the Capitol did not intend to create. And once people care about something, it becomes harder to control. This is why his relationship with Katniss and Peeta eventually becomes more than a simple mentor and tribute relationship. He sees pieces of himself in both of them. Katniss has the instinct to survive. Peeta has the ability to connect with people. Haymitch knows that both qualities are valuable, but he also knows that neither one is enough on its own. Survival without humanity can turn a person into something the capital wants. Humanity without survival can get a person killed. The challenge is finding the balance. That is exactly what Haymitch failed to understand when he was younger. Inside his own games, he learned the value of survival through painful experience. Later, he has the chance to help someone else combine survival with something larger. That is part of the reason his story feels tragic but also meaningful. The Capitol intended the Hunger Games to destroy hope. Haymitch's existence becomes evidence that hope can survive even after the arena. It may not look beautiful. It may be buried under anger, sarcasm, and pain, but it is still there. Otherwise, he would not keep trying to help the tributes from District 12. He would simply walk away. The fact that he continues means something. It means the part of him that wanted to protect people never completely disappeared. That part was damaged. It was buried, but it survived, and that is perhaps the most important connection between the 50th Hunger Games and the events that come later. Haymitch does not become a mentor because he suddenly becomes optimistic. He becomes one because he knows what happens when nobody prepares you. He knows what it feels like to enter the arena without understanding the system. He knows what it costs when someone you care about is not prepared for what the capital can do. So even when his methods seem harsh, there is usually a reason behind them. He wants tributes to understand the danger before it is too late. He wants them to recognize manipulation. He wants them to think before acting. And most of all, he wants them to survive. That desire is rooted in his own experience. The 50th Hunger Games have also given him a unique perspective on the capital's obsession with spectacle. He has seen how quickly the audience can turn suffering into entertainment. He has seen how a tribute can become a favorite one day and be forgotten the next. That makes him skeptical of fame. He does not trust applause. He does not trust cameras. And he does not trust the capital's generosity. He knows that every reward has a purpose. Every gift comes with expectations. Every public celebration can hide private control. That understanding makes Haymitch difficult to manipulate. And eventually, that becomes one of his greatest strengths. The capital may be able to control where he lives. It may control what is broadcast. It may control the games. But it cannot completely control what he understands. And knowledge is something that becomes increasingly valuable as Panem moves toward rebellion. The 50th Hunger Games therefore serve as a turning point not only for Haymitch, but for the larger history of the country. They show that the capital's system can be challenged from within. They show that the people inside the arena can learn from the rules rather than simply obey them. And they show that survival can produce knowledge that the capital cannot easily erase. Haymitch carries that knowledge for years. He carries it through every Hunger Games. He carries it through every tribute he mentors. And eventually, he carries it into the larger conflict that threatens to tear Panem apart. That is why his victory should not be viewed as the conclusion of his story. It is the beginning of his role in the history of the Hunger Games. The capital wanted to create a champion. Instead, it created someone who understood the system from the inside. And once someone understands how a system works, they can begin recognizing where it is vulnerable. Haymitch's greatest contribution may therefore not be the way he won the 50th Hunger Games. It may be everything he learned afterward, everything he remembered, everything he refused to forget. Because eventually, those memories become more than personal pain. They become knowledge. And knowledge, when shared with the right people at the right moment, can become the beginning of change.